Whoosh! Hello BookTube, I am back, and today we are going to talk about romances because it's Valentine's Day and that's what everyone's talking about. And I've been thinking about literary romances because of a Jane Austen blog post that I just spent like 2 hours writing, and I think that I have enough content to talk about some literary couples that never were, some literary couples that ended up together but were really unlikely, like why did that even happen, and a few literary couples that I'm just gonna throw in as bonuses. So yes, all the literature, all of the romance, that's what's in this video. I'm not sure what I'm gonna title it yet, but I'll figure something out. Okay, so first I'm going to discuss a blog post that I wrote in 2015 that is about literary couples that never were. There are spoilers in this post for Pride and Prejudice, Little Women, The Giver, and A Tale of Two Cities. So if you haven't read, oh, and Lord of the Rings. So if you haven't read all of those, please take a moment to go read them, a moment, you know, a couple days or whatever, and come back to this video because they're all really good and they're worth reading and or watching. Mr. Collins and Mary Bennet is the first literary couple that never was. Mr. Collins is just the worst, and we all know that, but he proposes first to Jane Bennet, then to Elizabeth Bennet, and then he goes down the line. No, he doesn't. He doesn't go down to Mary Bennet. He goes over to their friend's house, their neighbor's house, and proposes to Charlotte, and Charlotte doesn't love him. She's marrying him for his money. He should have gone down the line for Mary. Mary would have been the perfect fit for Mr. Collins because they're both bookish, they're both antisocial, they're both obsessed with sermons. She's plain, and Charlotte is more special than Mary. Mary should have gone with Mr. Collins because they're both kind of meh, but Charlotte deserved someone better. Yes, she ended up marrying him, so I guess she didn't deserve anyone better, but Charlotte does deserve better, and the Longbourn estate would have stayed in the Bennet family if Mr. Collins had gone down the line and married Mary. So that's all I have to say on that. That's in Pride and Prejudice. Mr. Collins is the worst, but he should have married Mary Bennet. Next is Theodore Lawrence and Jo March. This is the biggest literary couple that never was, but should have been. They're basically Anne of Green Gables and, oh my goodness, Gilbert Blythe. And because they're kind of frenemies at first, and, well, I guess they're frenemies later on. I don't know. There's just a lot of tension there between Laurie and Jo, and I think that they would have actually made a good couple. Jo ends up turning him down, even though he does propose, so he was on the right track. She just ruined it all. She turns down his proposal because she thinks they would fight too much. But isn't that kind of the whole point? Like, they go together so well, like they're so similar, they would be perfect for one another. Yes, Jo was wise to marry him because they would have argued, and they do have somewhat conflicting personalities, but they're more compatible than they are conflicting. Laurie ends up marrying her little sister Amy, and it's just weird. And then she ends up marrying this random professor guy, and it's just weird. It's not the way it should have been. So if I could go back and rewrite that series, or that book, Little Women, I would have Laurie and Jo marry because they deserve one another, and it's just like, how could they not be together? It's one of those. So another literary couple that should have been together is Jonas and Fiona in The Giver. Now, I don't know if you've read The Giver or if you just read it or if you saw the movie or whatever. Please read the book and don't see the movie, and then go read the whole series because The Giver is a quartet. The Giver is one of my favorite series. And in the very first book, you're introduced to Jonas, the protagonist, and Fiona has to stay behind at the very end of The Giver. She stays in this community while Jonas goes on and starts a newer, better community. And it just makes me so sad that they couldn't be together. Like, obviously there's a little bit of room for interpretation, but it pretty much says she stays and he goes. And I just think they were so young, but they really loved each other, and if you've read the rest of the Giver Quartet, you'll see the community that Jonas makes and how good it is, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't get married, and it's really sad. Another couple that should have been, but never was, is from A Tale of Two Cities, and I have the other books, but I just happen to have this one at my feet. Sydney Carton and Lucy Manette don't get married. Instead, he dies for her. Spoiler alert. I told you there's a spoiler. He dies for her. That's how much he loves her, but he's never able to, like, tell her because of social standing and all this gibberish, and it just makes you want to throw the book across the room. Wow. I threw the book across the room. Okay, number 5, Gandalf and Lady Galadriel. Yes, she's an elf. Yes, he's a wizard. But they're just both so wise, and I know she's married to the king or Lord Celeborn or whoever, but Lady Galadriel and Gandalf, not just in the movies, but in the books, would be so compatible, and they're, like, both old and kind of immortal, so why not? Like, they could totally do that. But I guess it just wasn't meant to be. She has to stay and rule her people, and he gets to traverse the world and direct Frodo's on quests and Bilbo's on quests and all those things. So, they never were. There are a few more romances I'd like to point out. Pride and Prejudice are enemies become romantic and fall in love, and so is Anne of Green Gables. And there are a few really unlikely romances that happen. In the Elsie Dinsmore series, which I'm going to reread. I'm rereading a lot of my favorite books, including The Book Thief. In this series, she, spoiler alert, ends up marrying her like, not tutor, but it's like, he's older than her. It's almost like she's marrying a tutor, because it's her dad's friend, but her dad had her really, really young, and the friend's a little younger than the dad, so they kind of make it work, but there's kind of like a 15-ish year age gap between them. So it's just kind of unlikely, but they're really cute once they're married. It's just really weird because you see her from, like, when she's 8 or 9 years old, and he's like 20-something, and you're just like, how is this possible that these two end up together? But it happens. And Gone with the Wind is one about, like, hating and then falling in love, and it's also really unlikely because, really, Rhett and Scarlet? Like, I know it's one of the greatest love stories of all time, but isn't it a little bit of a stretch? I don't think Rhett would have actually ever settled down, even with Scarlet. They're both so wild and crazy and independent, they can't, that's why it ends up, spoiler alert, not working out, because they're both so independent and they just do their own thing. They don't consult the other or anything. It's not marriage material. The relationship is sweet and crazy and fun and flirtatious, but it's not, it should not have ended in them marrying. But it makes sense that it ends in them marrying because they're so rash, and then getting divorced because they're so different. Another romance where she does marry another tutor-like guy is when Emma marries Mr. Knightley. And this is actually a really sweet one. This actually is done really well. He is chastising her and is, like, he gets onto her for everything that she does wrong, and her sister and his brother are married. So the odds that Mr. Knightley and Emma would get together are really, really, really small. But somehow they get married even though their siblings are married. I don't know. That would just make for some slightly awkward family reunions. I don't know. Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. At the end of this book, it just rips your heart out. I have written, or not written, I like to write. I've made a video about beautiful endings, and this is one of them, I'm pretty sure. Because at the end of this, you can stop the video if you haven't seen it yet, or if you haven't read this yet, Estella and Pip are, like, together. Like, they're in the same scene at the end of it, but nothing's actually happened, and it's so open to interpretation. But she is, like, this cruel beauty, and she's raised to like control men and be evil, and he's just like this sweet innocent guy just going through everything, and at the end it's possible they're together. It's one of the most unlikely romances of all time, but you're rooting for them the whole time because Estella is so awful and he's so good, and just the fact that those could come together it's just insane. I Capture the Castle. If you like crazy twist endings, this is the book for you, because you will go through this whole book thinking it's going to be one way, and it will not be that way. I'm very sorry to tell you. I would like to reread this book because I can talk about it, but I really don't remember that much about it. So that's a bunch of literary romances. I make up a few romances. Mara, Daughter of the Nile, and The Witch of Blackbird Pond are two books that I love because of the subtlety of the romance. It's not a straight out romance. It's not a Jane Austen or a Bronte sisters. It's just like there's this plot that's happening with the main characters, but there's definitely chemistry between one or two of them, you know, like couples, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, why can't this like actually take place? But the romance is so subtle and it's so beautiful, and I'm just like, there's romance there, but no one else sees it. But actually other people do see it, and the author did that on purpose. So I guess all this makes me think about, like, when I'm writing books, do I want the romance to be out there? Do I want it to be like childhood sweethearts? Do I want them to be enemies and then become friends? Do I want it to be the whole tutor situation, which is a little weird? And then I'm currently, actually, I finally reread this. I'm rereading it right now. And maybe you could just have a book thief romance that's like, I can't talk about it. Go read this book. If you've not read this book, how many times have I told you to go read this book? This is not a romance, but it's another one of those subtle romances and sweet romances. There's a line of this book that says, "The only thing worse than a boy who hates you is a boy who loves you." That is a really good literary romance quote to end this video with. Sorry it went 12 minutes, but I could ramble about the romances. So let me know in the comments below, what are your favorite literary couples, or some literary couples that never were but should have been? Are there any different types of romances that I left out? I'm sure there were lots. So let me know in the comments below, and don't forget, the book was better.